Welcome back, riders. This is episode 4 of recapping my big roller coaster trip for 2024. If you are unfamiliar with this series, I recently went on a trip to the UK and Poland, and I'm ranking the lineup at each amusement park I went to. If you missed any of the prior episodes covering Thorpe Park, Alton Towers, and Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and you're interested in hearing my thoughts on those parks, go ahead and check out the playlist in the description of the video or at the end of the video in a card. In today's video, I will be ranking every roller coaster at Energylandia, an up-and-coming amusement park in Poland near Katowice. Before I left for the trip, I did a pre-ranking for the roller coaster lineup. If you're interested in a deeper explanation to what I was expecting going into every roller coaster, go ahead and check out that video in the card above. Like the other episodes, I will have whether a coaster went up, down, or unchanged compared to my pre-visit rankings to the side. And of course, after I talk about each roller coaster, I'll talk about any other rides I did at the park and share some overall thoughts. Let's jump into the list. Starting all the way down at number 19, which is crazy in itself, we have Draken, a Preston and Barbieri family coaster. Not sure if I said that right or not. I was somewhat excited for this going in because I thought it was at least a little unique for a kids/family coaster, but this ended up being one of, if not my least favorite roller coaster I have ever been on. Now, this is partially unique to me, as the big problem I had with this ride was because I am rather tall and I have a little meat on my bones, so my knee ended up being wedged between the restraint that like lowers up and down and the bar itself. It was like wedged between those two, and it was extremely unpleasant. And the entire ride, I was just begging for the ride to be over, and it was just extremely uncomfortable. This coaster's fine for kids, but for me and my circumstances, I would not ride this coaster again, even if you offered me 25 bucks. Maybe we'll start talking at 30, but 25, no way. Up next is Circus Coaster, an extremely small SBF coaster. I don't have much to say for this one. It's an extremely gentle coaster that goes in an oval with virtually no elevation change. It's just not last because, I wasn't riding it in a withering pain like Draken. One spot ahead of a coaster I can't talk about much is another coaster I can't talk about much. Fruity Loop Coaster. This is a SBF Wacky Worm, so there's not much going on here. This is not one of the crazier Wacky Worms out there, but it has a little more to offer than Circus Coaster. Coming in 16th might be a hot take or a surprise to some, but I have Viking Roller Coaster, a SBF spinning coaster. So, first off, I want to acknowledge that when I did the pre-ranking video, I completely forgot that this spinning coaster had over-the-shoulder restraints, and seemingly all roller coaster enthusiasts despise this coaster. So, once I recognized this, I was scared going in, but when I rode it, it wasn't that bad. I just found it extremely boring. There's not much bite, which actually might be good because of the over shoulder restraints. I didn't bang my head at all, so sure, it's not good. Sure, it's boring. Sure, it could be better, but horrendous, awful, historic, worst roller coaster to ever exist? In my opinion, no. Up next is my biggest faller from the park, Energis, a Vekoma family coaster. By no means is this a bad coaster or anything. I do like the layout, but similar to Draken, I was not the most comfortable on Energis. The problem with these new gen Vekoma trains is that they are not really tall friendly. I purposely have to slouch forward in order for the restraint to reach my waist as opposed to like my thighs closer to my knees. The problem is if I sit down just normally, the bar barely clears my knees. So oftentimes I like slide forward so that my knees, there's more clearance so it gets closer to my waist. But, for whatever reason, I'm not sure if I did that or not on Energis, but whatever happened, I wasn't that comfy. Plus, this one has the weird shin guards, so overall, I thought the trains held the ride experience back. Next up is Speed, an Intamin water coaster. This is yet another coaster that fell in my rankings, mostly due to personal circumstances. This is solely because it's a water coaster. I just don't like getting wet. And there was nothing with speed that I thought was worth the price of getting wet. So, the roller coaster section was meh, a little disappointing for how huge the coaster portion is. Number 12 is Happy Loops, an SBF spinning coaster. I thought this was a standard model, but it turns out that this one is an extended model, the only one I've ever been on. Everyone, including myself, kind of writes off these SBF spinning coasters, but in actuality, they can be fun, with the spinning, and I did prefer the extended layout over the standard. Without much hesitation, I'd rather subject myself to Happy Loops over getting myself wet on speed. The biggest surprise from the park was Mars, yet another SBF coaster. What really sealed the deal on this coaster was the theming. The coaster by itself is actually solid, but then you add in the theming, which is done quite well, and it really completed the whole experience. But definitely enough to be the best of the small coasters in the park. Just missing the top 10 is the new for 2024 Family Vekoma coaster, Honey Harbor. This one has a funky drop, which I liked. Otherwise, I thought it was just okay for a new gen Vekoma, but that's still enough to make it better than the coasters I've already covered in this video. Kicking off the top 10 is Frida, another new gen Vekoma family coaster. Something I was not aware of going in was that this is a clone of Rookie Racer at Six Flags St. Louis. Although Energylandia's version is worse as there is less theming than Rookie Racer, but the layout is pretty good in my opinion. There's a couple moments that are sneaky with the positive G's for a family coaster, which I appreciate. Coming in at number 9 is Boomerang, a Vekoma family. Boomerang, duh. This one is a clone of Snoopy's Soapbox Racers at Kings Island, although not nearly as cute, but it does have a little bit of theming, like going through a small building in the middle of the ride and then the spike. I actually really like the layout on this model. It's got faint weightlessness in a couple spots, and there's some good positives sprinkled in. From one Vekoma family boomerang to another Vekoma family boomerang, we have Light Explorers at number 8. For me personally, I put Light Explorers above Boomerang for one reason: the setting. I honestly have little doubt that the layout of Boomerang is better. That's not to say the layout of Light Explorers is bad. It's solid, but Light Explorers pretty much entirely is over the water and it's super cool. I really like the whole aesthetic of this coaster. Sticking with Vekoma, but this time for their suspended family coaster model, is Dragon Roller Coaster. For my friends in the States, this is a clone of Dragonflyer at Dollywood. These rides are a good time. The drop in the following turn is surprisingly whippy for a family coaster, and overall the layout is exciting. I especially love flying through the station. It's smooth and exciting. We are finally at the point in the countdown where we start talking about the bigger and more unique roller coasters at Energylandia, starting with Choco Chip Creek at number 6. This new for 2024 Vekoma Mine Train was a pretty good time. While it was not as thrilling as I was hoping for, it still had its moments, and it is one heck of a long ride. There are no standout moments that I recall, well, except for the impressive queue line, and I was a fan of that. But it's just such a long coaster that made it worth our while. And it's going to be even better when they finish the on-ride theming. Fingers crossed. All the way up at 5th place, we have a Vekoma SLC, believe it or not, Roller Coaster Mayan. As I talked about in the preview video, this is a new Vekoma SLC, so it actually does not try to beat you to death. Overall, this is a smooth ride, which in a way makes it a little less intense than the average SLC. Maybe that's not necessarily true, as you don't have to ride it nearly as defensively as normal, but what seems like a step down in intensity is made up by the fact that you can truly appreciate the SLC layout for once. It's always been a great layout, and it even sneaks in some close encounters with its own track and supports. Easily my favorite Vekoma SLC by a mile, although I have never been on Great Nor'easter at Maury's Piers, so Roller Coaster Mayan really has no competition right now. Now getting into the real standouts, starting with Formula at number 4. This coaster is pretty much credited with kicking off the new age Vekoma, and boy, are we glad that Energylandia gave them a chance. I remember when people were talking about this coaster on forum boards when it first opened in 2016, and it's crazy to see how much of an impact Vekoma has made since then. As for the ride itself, it's pretty good. The launch is solid, nothing to write home about, but better than something like a mock launch. Formula really excels by the way it flows. It moves from element to element so naturally, and it just flows so nicely. I did have two minor gripes though. One, Formula did not give a consistent ride. I rode this literally twice in the row in the same seat we were able to just re-ride. One had a fullest train and one had an emptiest train, and the difference was a bit more pronounced between those two rides than I would like to see, but it is what it is. Two, Formula is a bit short in length, and I kind of knew that going in, but I still felt like I wanted a little more each time I hit the brake run. It's only a little over 1,800 feet of track, but don't let those two things take away from Formula. This is an important roller coaster and a good one too. Kicking off the podium with the bronze medal is Abyssus, another Vekoma launch coaster. Abyssus is pretty much like if Formula went through a Super Size Me documentary. Virtually everything about this coaster is bigger and better than Formula, while also feeling similar in the way the sequencing flows extremely well. And Abyssus is actually a multi-launch coaster, unlike Formula. It starts with the less significant of the two launches, and it almost acts like a pre-lift section. But I still enjoyed it. It had some decent pops. The main launch of the ride, the second and final launch, was pretty good. You definitely feel the added speed it has over Formula. This leads to the top hat, which is somewhat famously trimmed pretty significantly. It still provides a decent to good drop, but you just can't help but think how much better it would be if the trim was not there. After you navigate the vertical loop, you bank left and encounter my favorite part of the ride, which is basically like an airtime hill, and it dives under the station, which is really good, but the airtime on this hill is legit. It's awesome. While Formula is a short ride, Abyssus is a very long ride. Almost too long. It's over 4,300 feet of track, and I'm not one to complain when a ride is too long, but I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who do not care for the ending of Abyssus. You bleed off way too much speed, and you're meandering for a good bit at the end of the ride. Like I said though, I didn't mind it, I just feel like other people will. Abyssus has an unload station, which is really cool to see overall, and especially from Vekoma, that's good for the future, but not when it's running one train like it was while we were there. And the theming is pretty good overall. Coming in at number two will probably come as a shock to you guys, but I have the Rocky Mount Construction Hyper Hybrid Zadra. My projected number one pick for the entire trip didn't even finish as the best coaster at its own park. And unfortunately, I just can't pinpoint why this coaster let me down. To me, many of the elements just did not hit as hard as I would have liked. Maybe it was not running great, as both days we were out at the park, they were kind of gloomy and or a bit chilly, running on one train, but I digress. Honestly, the only part of this ride I thoroughly enjoyed was the ending with the S-bend turn. That's awesome. And then the twist into the last inversion, which is a good one, and then charging into the brakes. Seemingly everything else was a letdown for me, especially the airtime moments. I was able to ride Iron Gwazi just a week ago, and in my opinion, Zadra does not even come close to Gwazi, which is kind of weird because in a way they are extremely similar. Right before I rode Zadra this summer, I was able to re-ride Wicked Cyclone for my first time in years, and guys, I'm taking Wicked Cyclone at like the third of a size. I wish I knew why I have beef with Zadra, and trust me, I'm not trying to have these hot takes just for the sake of it. I'd really just honestly, I'd rather ride like 75 to like 66% of all the other RMCs out there. I recently was hanging out with two enthusiasts. One of them, I know he's been on more coasters than me, and the other, I'm not entirely sure, but I wouldn't count against it. Zadra is both of their number ones. I thought Zadra was the safest pick to land in my top 25 on this trip, and I haven't done my yearly rankings yet for this year, but I'm not even sure if it's top 50. I just have bad luck with these European RMCs, I guess. That leaves the Intamin Hypercoaster Hyperion at number one, and this is a spot it earned rather than the spot Zadra lost. I loved Hyperion, and it was better than I was expecting. The first three elements is one of my favorite sequences on any coaster out there. Starting with the drop. It is absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't quite give it an A plus as that's reserved for like the best of the best, but it's right there with an A. This is followed by one of the best airtime hills in the world. Powerful sustained ejector that just seems to last forever. And then following that is an absolutely diabolical turnaround. RCDB lists it as a dive drop, which is considered an inversion. Not sure if I agree it's an inversion, but whatever it is absolutely lovely. Especially if you're sitting on the right side and or towards the front, it just tries to fold your body in half with the super quick transition. Even after the dive drop is another good element, which is like this mini wave turn, and it gives some pretty good laterals. The next two elements are the biggest drawback with Hyperion. It is a speed hill which gives some airtime. It's much weaker than you would think it would be. And this is followed by a bigger camelback, which is pretty much a dud. More times than not, it gave zero airtime. But I thoroughly enjoyed the rest of the ride. It's like a twister section that hands out positive G's, it's got great airtime, and it sneaks in laterals too. Hyperion really exceeded my expectations in a great way. Now I'll move on to talking about any other rides I did and other thoughts on the park. There are only two other rides I did. One was the Wonder Wheel. I have mixed opinions on this one. The views were great, but the ride is far too short. It only went around one time, and it's not like other Ferris wheels where they move extremely slow if it only goes around one time. Two was Monster House, and to be blunt, this is just a sad dark ride. It's a mishmash of anything they could find, and it makes no cohesive sense. It was in a warehouse, and it almost was like way too open, like the ceiling's too tall, and the sets were a little further away from your vehicle than they really should have been. To piggyback off that, my first overall thought I want to share is that this park could really use some thrilling flat rides. They have plenty of flat rides, don't get me wrong, but none of them were appealing enough to the point that I had to do them and or I was really excited to do them. The only thing that came close was their booster ride. I would have been willing to try it, but it just looked inferior to something like Catwoman Whip at Six Flags St. Louis as it was a Fabry. Speaking of which, most of the flat rides are either Fabry or SBF, so most of them are inferior to the models we're used to here in the States. They had a drop tower that looked so awful, and I've heard that it's just absolutely awful. We didn't even bother trying it. So I'd really love to see some big name manufacturers come in and add some thrilling flat rides. Something that became apparent extremely early in my first day at the park was that Energylandia has real infrastructure. I knew this park was littered with an absurd amount of rides, but I kind of thought it was going to be like Roller Coaster Tycoon or Planet Coaster Sandbox mode, where everything else except rides is an afterthought. But to my surprise, Energylandia actually is built up pretty well. The whole park was built with capacity in mind. It's insane how much of a crowd this park could handle. The pathways are crazy wide, there are plenty of places to eat, and the food is actually pretty good. The park is pretty, especially in the back half of the park. Plenty of trees, and they have big ones too. Lost Island, take notes. Energylandia might have more lockers than any other park in the world, both like throughout in the midways and even within the ride lines too. When we went, they were celebrating Halloween and or Oktoberfest, not sure which one to be honest. And they had an absolutely ludicrous amount of pumpkins in every corner of the park. We're talking like tens of thousands, maybe? Definitely thousands. It's crazy. And they have this whole boarding process for a lot of their coasters, and it's unique. And, it's obvious they put a lot of thought into it, and I've never seen it anywhere else. Energylandia is much more than just rides plopped down everywhere, and that was a big, pleasant surprise for me. The last thing I want to touch on is the resort. We ended up staying at the Western Camp Resort, and I think it was a pretty good deal as well as an ideal place to stay. This place seems like it's newer than the park itself, and it's extremely nice and clean. Our cabin was extremely large with plenty of room and beds for the four of us, so if you're traveling in a group, I would most certainly recommend this. Included in your stay is a breakfast buffet, which was definitely some of my favorite food I had anywhere on this trip to Europe. Also included in your stay, they give you some skip the line passes for, I think it was Abyssus, I want to say, Zadra. We didn't end up needing them on our trip, but it is an added perk, especially if you're going to go if the park does get busy. While I did not check out any of the other amenities, they have fishing, a pool, football slash soccer pitch for my American viewers, a volleyball court, and a sauna. Additionally, there is a free shuttle to the park. It picks you up right at the resort and drops you off right at the front of the park. But for whatever reason, if you need to walk to the park, it's only like 20 minutes. We did do the walk one time, and it wasn't bad at all. In fact, you're able to get really close and personal with Hyperion while on the walk. So I would recommend doing it once. It's pretty cool. And lastly, there is a McDonald's pretty much halfway between the resort and the park, so that's pretty convenient if you are doing the walk. Or if you're just at the resort and you need something to eat, the McDonald's is probably only like 10 minutes away, so it's really nice. And with that, that's all I could think to share about my time at Energylandia. Have you been to this park? What do you think of the roller coaster lineup or the park as a whole? Feel free to let me know in the comments below, and thank you for checking out the video. Push down, pull up, exit to the right. Hope you enjoyed the video, and go have your greatest day yet. Choo choo, bye!